Let's put together a hand-tied pioneer style quilt.
So the first things that I want to talk about are supplies. And these are the things that I used when I make my quilts. The first things are obviously the quilt front and the quilt back. I've already ironed these and cut them to size. And we have the quilt batting, which is going to go in between the quilt front and the quilt back. And I use the Polyfill Extra Loft, and I fold this in half so that it gets like a thicker padding for the quilt. But if you do that, you do cut down the size of your quilt. So if you want it to hang over the edges of your bed, you're going to have to size up. And then the next thing is the yarn that we're going to use to put everything together. For this quilt, I'm using the Yarn Bee Soft and Sleek from Hobby Lobby, but really you just want a yarn that is a size 4 medium, so like a thicker yarn. For the needle, you want one that is sharp enough to go through all the layers of your fabric, and you want one that has a hole large enough for your yarn to go through. It's been a long time since I've bought this, but I believe that it is one of the tapestry needles from Hobby Lobby that's in their tapestry needle multi-pack. A few other things that I use is this little cloth in case the needle is too hard to pull through the fabric, then this kind of like using this kind of helps. And then I have some scissors, I have a small ruler. If you want to really like strategically plan out where your yarn is going to go through, you can use a water soluble pen or chalk to mark out where everything is. I also have some little clips to kind of hold everything together, some large picnic tablecloth clips that I got from Amazon to hold my quilt to the table while I'm putting the yarn in it. And then I have some quilter's pens from Hobby Lobby that I use to do the edges. And then I have a small trash can that is actually a popcorn bucket, but it works. So since we talked about all the supplies, let's go into the actual quilting process. And the first thing that I like to do is just lay everything out on the floor exactly how you want it to look when it's finished. So as you can see, I have everything laying flat on the floor, and I kind of made a little sandwich. So I have my back laying pattern side down. I have my quilt batting, which I folded in half, and then I have my quilt top, which I laid out exactly how I wanted it, so it's all nice and flat. And you can see that my backing is a lot wider than the rest of my quilt, and that's because I like to leave about 4.5 inches on each side so that I can use that fabric for the border. In order to transfer this exactly like it is to the table, what I like to do is I like to use these little clips that I got from Hobby Lobby to just pin the edges. So I'll turn over the edging fabric of the back, so kind of an idea of what it will look like in the end when the border is done, and then just clip it into place. So I have the clips about every 5 inches or so, just so that it's secure and in place, and I do that around the entire quilt. Now that I have all the edges clipped together, I'm going to roll it long ways so that it's easier to move onto the table. Now that the quilt is on the table, I like to secure it using these tablecloth, like picnic tablecloth clips, and just kind of go around the perimeter with it, putting them every couple feet. With the quilt clamped down, we can now start threading it or making the knots that's going to hold everything together. And I like to do these about 4 to 5 inches apart from each other. I think that the actual package instructions for this batting says 4 inches, but I usually just eyeball it and kind of do wherever there's a seam in my top quilt. So like I would do one in the middle of this seam and then again in the middle of this one, and just kind of do that for each row that I have. So to start threading or making the knots, you're just going to thread your yarn through the needle like it was regular thread. So just like that, I leave a little tail on it. And then you just stick it into the fabric, all 3 layers. So until you hit the table, you'll hear like a little tap, tap, tap sound. And then you'll come back up through another part here and then just thread it through. And sometimes it can be, depending on how thick your fabric is, it can be a little bit difficult to pull through. So you just kind of wiggle it around and wiggle it through and then pull it up. And then I cut it about the same length. And then you just tie a knot. And then I do like a triple knot, I guess, just so it's secure. And then cut the yarn to the desired length. I go about 2 inches. Again, just eyeball it. So I just continue this process through the whole quilt of threading the needle through with the yarn, stabbing a hole into it till it goes through all 3 layers or reaches the bottom, and then coming out and pulling it through. And then cutting and tying it. So I just finished tying all of the knots and cutting all of the ties to the length that I wanted. As you can see, I still have a lot of yarn left, and I bought 5 ounces because that's what they had in the color that I wanted, but I probably only used 1 to 2. So if you wanted to buy a smaller skein or use leftover yarn from a different project, you are welcome to do that. So the last step in making the quilt is doing the border. And you can do this with quilt binding or bias tape, but what I like to do is the extra backing that I have that I cut, like it's like 4 inches or so. I just fold it over in half and then fold it over the top of the quilt, and then pin it into place and then sew it. And if you do it this way, it's easier to do one side of the quilt at a time. So I'll pin this long side and then maybe pin a short side and then just go all the way around. And I sew this with my sewing machine. You can sew this by hand, but I found that it's easier to do it with a sewing machine if you are able to. For the corners, I fold it kind of the long ways and then fold in the other side again and then just fold it over and then pin it. I can't pin it with one hand, so um, I just pin it and then just sew it across like this and then again on this side. So you'll have like a little square on the end. This is what the corner looks like pinned. And now that I have this whole side done, it is time to sew. The machine that I use is a Brother HC 1850, and I'm just using a standard needle with the basic zigzag foot, which is just the standard foot that the machine comes with. If you have a walking foot, that would be even better, but I can't find one for this machine, so I'm just using the standard foot and it seems to work well. I'm also just using a basic stitch, which is this one on the machine. For the thread, I am going to be using the upholstery thread from Hobby Lobby in white. And I really like using a more heavy duty thread for the border so that I know that it won't come apart when it's being used and pulled on. I also like, if you can't find the upholstery thread because it's kind of hard to find, I also like their heavy duty thread and I think this is called extra strong or ultra strong one from Joann's. These are both really good options if you can't find the upholstery thread. This is what the finished side looks like. And this is how close to the edge I did my stitches. And I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of it and show you what the finished quilt looks like.
Here is the finished quilt. It did take me a few days to complete, but it is now finally done. And here is what the quilt looks like on my full-size mattress. As you can see that even though I used full-size batting, it doesn't quite go over the sides of the bed. And here's my finished quilt again. So thanks for watching and happy quilting!